welcome. This is the first MUR event of 2022, and it's being co-sponsored by MUR and the Department of Sociology, and we thank Sociology for their contributions. I'm very pleased to introduce you to Dr. Danièle Bélanger, but before I do that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie, because I think she has a few words that she would like to say.
So it's welcoming everyone to Western University, and we wanted to acknowledge that Western is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, and the Attawandaron peoples. And we respect the longstanding relationship that Indigenous nations have had to this land, as they're the original caretakers. We also recognize the historical and ongoing injustices that Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit endure in Canada, and we accept responsibility as a public institution to contribute towards revealing and correcting miseducation, as well as renewing respectful relationships with Indigenous communities through our teaching, research, and community service. Back over to you, Mike.
Great, thank you for that. First, an introduction to Dr. Bélanger. Danièle Bélanger is a professor in the Department of Geography and a Canada Research Chair in Global Migration Dynamics at Laval University in Quebec City. Her research interests include international migrations, social demography, gender, population and development, gender and social inequalities, and reproductive health. And for those of you that have been at Western for a number of years, you probably remember that Dr. Bélanger was once a colleague of ours in the Department of Sociology. So we're doubly excited to welcome her back. Initially, we were going to actually bring her in person, but Omicron had other ideas. So unfortunately, we're back online. The title of her talk, however, is the Office and the CA, Federal MPs, District Offices, and Staff in the Provision of Immigration Services in Canada. So Dr. Bélanger, welcome. Thank you very much for presenting your interesting research. And I'm going to sit back because people are here to see you, not me.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's really an honor for me to be here today, and I can't see all of you, but I've seen some of you, and really I'm really touched that you're being here and listening to my talk after having been away from Western for almost 9 years now. So this research is really new and really exciting. So before I start, let me acknowledge my research team. So you see their names on the screen. We have a group of co-investigators, a data analyst, a cartographer, and assistants. So what I'll present today is really the outcome of a team effort. We haven't published yet, it's all underway. So your feedback will be very useful to us. I also would like to mention that my PowerPoint features some photographs from the US-Canada border. Those are taken by photographer Michel Huneau. So before I start, let me say that in this presentation, I will use interchangeably the words constituency, district, and riding. And I'll refer to MP local office staff, as they call themselves, constituency assistants, or CA, as in my title, or I may call them office staff simply. Although I will not mention it systematically, I focus on staff or assistants who are doing immigration casework specifically, most of whom do this full-time and some for many years. In 2019, the report of the Auditor General of Canada analyzed data from federal government call centers for the public. Among them was the Ministry of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada call center, to which I'll refer by its acronym from now on, IRCC. Well, IRCC had the worst performance of all call centers. In 2018, only 22% of the 1.7 million calls were answered by an agent. All the others never got through. So this is only 1 in 5 persons trying to reach IRCC could actually talk to someone. This highlights how difficult it is to contact a representative of the state to inquire about an immigration matter. How did this happen? As for many other government services, this began in the 1990s with the managerial turn, new administrative procedures, emphasis on websites, and this really led to a significant change in the delivery of services. Most desks, offices were shut down. As of 2012, most offices were shut down. But people's struggles in dealing with immigration are also symptomatic of the increasing complexity, fast-changing remoteness, and opacity of the Canadian immigration bureaucracy. For many users, it's a real administrative maze, as some of you know well. So for applicants, getting information and services often turns into an assault course. The slightest misstep leads to the abrupt slowdown and sometimes the failure of the immigration process. Many people turn to private actors, consultants, and lawyers, but of course this is costly. So many people who've dealt with immigration are aware that one can go to an MP office to seek assistance. Many other people who have nothing to do with immigration are very surprised when I talk about this. Reports on what MP offices actually do in Canada document that for many offices, the majority of assistance time goes into immigration. This is a really big part of what happens in MP offices across Canada. So Peter McLeod is one of the first ones who noticed that something was going on. He did a study in 2004 whereby he drove across Canada and visited 100 district offices to study what they were doing. His study was not about immigration specifically, but he did notice something. He said in his report that Immigration Canada has successfully downloaded a considerable expanse onto the parliamentary system, since he says that because district offices are funded by the House of Commons. He said this capture of constituency staff has occurred not by design, but simply as a consequence of the inadequacy of the ministry's own support services. So he says that constituency offices are a bureaucratic backstop. He talks about how district offices are then part of the immigration system. Sarah Marriott, who wrote an MA, a very interesting MA thesis on this topic, she's practically the only one who's researched this topic. She calls this a House of Commons funded new front line of the Canadian immigration system and a backdoor to reach the immigration bureaucracy. From our data so far, we want to argue that it's not really a backdoor, but MP offices have really become a front door to our RCC. But the outcome of having this front door through MP offices is that the services provided across the country are very unequal. And this has been pointed out by a few observers. And this would be because constituency offices provide services to constituents, the type of casework that they provide because they want to get votes. And secondly, MP assistants have a high degree of discretion in their job to the extent that it would raise issues of fairness and equity. So we'll come back to these two hypotheses as we go along in the talk. So given the situation and this very scant research on this, my team and I, we have 3 questions that I'll address in this presentation. Each of these questions corresponds to an article in progress. So first, we're wondering what's the role and place of MP district offices in the landscape of immigration services? And by landscape, we're really interested in various actors, not strictly the government, but other actors as well. Secondly, we have questioned about this unevenness of services. How can we measure variation in services and what would be the determinants of this variation? One typical question is, does the political party of an MP, is this a very important factor in determining immigration services? And thirdly, we're very interested in the assistant as really the mediator, because the CA is the key person providing immigration services. It's not the MP. They act on behalf of their MP, but they do all the work. So what's their role in providing these services? Okay. So how did I come to study this? Just a word here. Over the past couple of decades, I followed very closely research on various groups of individuals doing border work. my research was always on migrants, with migrants, particularly precarious migrants, but I was very intrigued by people who have to implement policy, who make decisions, who deal with migrants. So some years ago, we invited to this colloquium series when I was at Western, our colleague Vic Sasowicz, who wrote this book, Points of Entry on Visa Officers. There's Karine Côté-Boucher's work on staff from the Canadian Border Services Agency, Shule Tompkinson's work on the role of lawyers in hearings at the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada. So there's so much interesting work on these different actors. And this is through researching this that I realized that this particular actor, MP offices and assistants, had barely been looked at. So the research will draw from two theoretical bodies of literature. One is on administrative borders. For entry into nation states, it is increasingly administrative processes, policies, directives that govern who gets in and how to get in. So the term administrative borders expresses the shifting in the location of borders from geo-localized lines between states to administrative processes. In that sense, we approach this research with an understanding that MPs' offices can act as points of entry and assist people in this administrative maze. And constituency assistants, as we argue, can act as brokers or mediators of institutional processes that govern access to Canada. Another key concept is discretion, which has been used in all the above mentioned studies. So in our study, discretion can be about the MP and about the assistant, because MPs hold very important discretion in how they approach their mandate as representatives, and they hold a lot of discretion when it comes to their work in their district. So in the House of Commons Guide for MPs, for instance, it says that MPs have the full discretion over the direction and control of the work performed on their behalf by their employees. So it means they may decide if they'll have 1 or 2 or 3 full-time staff doing immigration work, which will determine how much assistants can do, how far they can take files, how much they can invest. Now, with respect to assistants' discretion, there's almost no research on this. I want to mention outright that CAs have no decision-making power. They're not like visa officers. They are more like influencers, like consultants or lawyers, and they have a specific set of resources to do their work. But they, it's something that I'll explore with you. So one thing we noticed too is that within offices, if we use the office as a space of discretion, assistants may have different or conflicting priorities, which may, relative to their MP, and this may influence the way they handle casework. So we'll see that. So in sum, this research opens up the MP's office as a critical site of the study within sociology, geography of migration, institutions, administrative borders, and discretion. So in doing this work, we have 3 sources of data we're working on. First of all, we created this database on districts, I should say districts, not offices, from various sources. I'll come back to that data set in a minute. Secondly, we have sent last year an online survey to all 338 district offices, and we obtained 117 responses from assistants who do immigration work. They are the ones who filled out the survey. So that's a 35% response rate, which is pretty good for this type of survey. And finally, we conducted last summer, or just before the elections were announced, a series of 33 interviews online across the country. And we tried to get good representation in terms of political parties, provinces, region, and gender. And interviews lasted an average of 90 minutes. I should say we had extremely good reception from assistants who felt their work in immigration was not visible enough and were very anxious to share what they do and all the challenges and so on. So first, before I move on, I'd like to brief you about some resources, federal government resources that MP offices have to deal with immigration. And this is very important to understand what McLeod and Marriott have observed when they say that MP offices have become IRCC desks or IRCC outposts. Why is that? And it's because it's now institutionalized because of resources that are specifically for MP offices, so that MP offices and assistants in particular have direct and really privileged access to IRCC. So you might have heard of this, but there is a special call center at IRCC that only deals with calls and emails from MP offices. So assistants can call there and talk to an agent who can see and communicate all the activity on a file. They can also access, and that's very important, the visa officer's notes who made the decision on the file. And they can provide hints, they can discuss with the assistant about, what's going on with this file, was it stuck, why was it rejected perhaps. They don't have power, but they can provide information that would be very useful for an assistant to move on with the file and establish a strategy. For more complex cases, MP offices can go to the Ministerial Inquiries Division at IRCC. And there they have access to very experienced visa officers who have the power, a certain power, to reverse decision, accept administrative reconsiderations, analyze files with the CA. So very important. And this one many of us have heard about because it's out in the media from time to time when an MP will go to a CA, the minister's office, to request intervention. Usually it's for deportation orders, to postpone the order so there's time to figure out a solution for the family. But that's very unusual. And what's interesting is when they decide to do so, the assistant will have done very, very in-depth research into the case to make sure this case could not harm the MP in any way. They also have access to this research team from the Library of Parliament, which is very interesting because they can access archives and investigate past cases. And what's important to stress is that these resources are unique to MP offices, and they provide faster and better access than lawyers and consultants. And of course, MP services are free of charge. It's walk-in and it's free of charge. And they take everyone. MP offices have also access to CBSA and to IRB. They have very good access, similar to other actors, but they can also establish good relationships with certain people within these services and obtain interesting information, very useful information. Now, I'd like to talk about the day-to-day work because to give you a better insight into what's happening. CAs are not performing border work per se because they don't decide who gets in or not. They're really different from visa officers, as I said. So they influence and they attempt to mediate between migrants and the state. They try at times to influence and contest decisions. So their work relates to administrative border because they labor to untangle situations, unblock stuck files, take care of people who fall between cracks, clarify. Sometimes they will try to speed up a process or reverse a decision. Most actions taken by CAs are to request information and to relay it to the constituents. Higher levels of involvement are less common, but nonetheless very important. But what we see in our data is that there are very significant differences in how much they attempt to influence, and I'll come back to that. But beyond that border work, CAs perform a great deal of emotional work. They're like from some frontline street level bureaucrats who interact with the public on a day-to-day basis, although there are fewer and fewer of those. But in these interactions, they meet very frustrated, anxious, angry, sad, desperate people who face uncertainty, long waiting times, red tape bureaucracy, negative decisions, and deportation orders. In these processes, constituents often have the impression that their MP can interfere on their individual case. So dealing with expectations is a very big part of CA's work. CAs we interviewed are very unevenly equipped to face the enormous amount of emotions that enter their office emails and phone lines. So a big part of their job is to listen, calm, explain, and reassure. And thirdly, I'll just mention briefly that CAs may do political work in the realm of immigration. They can inform the government about unintended consequences of policies or of certain bureaucratic procedures. And if researchers are aware of those, it's a good idea to relay that information to the MP. They can make a statement in Parliament, or they can go to the minister's office. Now, first question is, what's the role and place, in this landscape? And this is a kind of a structural question. And we're trying to go beyond, what others have done before, whereby they really focus on three actors: those in need of services, IRCC, and district offices. But in fact, what our data leads us to argue is that district offices are much more than IRCC desks or outposts, because they have this access into the IRCC bureaucracy. They have become a hub of immigration services, where many actors interact, collaborate, but also compete. What we see in our data is that CAs are very connected to multiple resources and actors, both within and beyond the federal government, and from a more spatial analysis viewpoint, within and beyond the borders of their district. And that's really interesting and really specific to immigration work. So I'll show you two figures that come from ours, that we drafted from data from the survey. One is about what we call the access network, and one is about the action network. So the access network say, how do people find out, because it's not advertised. There's no national advertisement of the work of MP offices in immigration. It's totally to the discretion of each office to let people know or not, and how they do it. So basically people find it's word of mouth, but what we find, and here it is, what we find is when we ask who comes to your office, we see that, immigrants, individual or families, come often or very often. The percentages on the slide here indicate the responses for this particular group of people. When the CA said they would come, these groups come often or very often. So you see that non-immigrants, that's very interesting at the bottom left, non-immigrants also come often or very often on behalf of someone else. Family reunification, study permit, my brother is stuck in Ghana, my sister is in Argentina. So a lot of people come on behalf of others, or my neighbor, or the person I'm going to rent my house to, is a foreign student stuck abroad. Can you help speed up the process? What you see also is that other actors come a lot to the office: employers, about temporary workers, community groups, churches, and also at the top, you see lawyers and consultants also go to MP offices. And I don't have time, but if you want to discuss this in the question period, it's really interesting to study the relationship between immigration constituency assistants, lawyers, and consultants, and to see how different those relationships are across Canada. Now, moving on to this action network, really. So here we ask people, we ask assistants, when you deal with your cases, what resources do you use? So everyone practically goes to this IRCC line and ministerial inquiries, others government services such as CBSA, as I've indicated. They also, those are the green lines, the federal government services. The blue lines are more the more political resources. So they may resort to other offices or their own colleagues. And the orange arrows are other services, other resources. They deal a lot with provincial MP, MLA offices, for instance, especially with this multi-governance system that's developing in Canada. So immigration there are steps taken by the province, so they have to deal with provinces. So you see that they're very connected. So I'll make a few remarks here about this first question. MP offices are very connected to government and non-government resources, and really everyone converges towards the MP offices because they're sort of like a special entry point into IRCC. Immigration actors interact in various directions. They refer clients to MP offices and vice versa. They can collaborate, talk to each other to jointly move a file forward or attempt to influence a decision. In some offices, they work very closely with lawyers, and others, they don't want to talk to one another. So they can compete or refuse to collaborate. Thirdly, MP offices have different networks, both in terms of range and intensity. And this partly depends on the location of the constituency and the assistance. So I'll come back to these 2 points later on. Now, if we go back, if we look at the network, now I'm in the geography department, so I'm interested in space. And this angle has been really interesting in thinking about these data, because in political science, there's work on MP offices and district work and MP style, and there's a lot of good work. And it's always assumed that the community and the territory completely overlap. The community to whom services are offered are people within the district. And theoretically, the MP office should only offer services to those living within its territory. But with immigration, it's very different, because a lot of people to whom the offices provide services are not physically in the district. They can be in other districts or they can be abroad. And the other interesting point that we can think about is that because they're not there, because they're not often citizens and not permanent residents, they can still be abroad, they can be on temporary status, they can be without status, so they're not voters. Some are probably future voters, but many of them are not voters. So this question of district office work being, for political purposes in order to get votes, when it comes to immigration, is very different. And it really troubles the literature in political science that suggests that casework is political and that it aims to get votes. So, we're really thinking through this and suggesting that the role of MP offices in immigration in general, and as IRCC desks in particular, seems to contribute in reconfiguring the spatiality and role of district offices work in Canada. So I think we have to look at immigration casework differently from other casework, like Canada Revenue Agency. They do a ton of that, Veteran Affairs, EI, unemployment, and so on. So immigration work is really, really different. Moving on to the second question. This is the piece about this database I was mentioning, whereby we're trying to approach this issue of variation and look at some of the determinants. And here our unit of analysis is the district. So we did a request for information to IRCC, and what we obtained are the number of calls and emails to the IRCC Information Center for MPs and Senators, and to the Ministerial Inquiries Division, so those two unique special resources for MP offices. Unfortunately, IRCC doesn't provide data separate for these two units, it's all together. But we had a full list for each of the 338 districts, the number of calls that were made to these two units per month. And for this particular analysis, we retained data for this period, September 2018 to September 2019. There were so many adjustments. We had to, by-election changes in parties in some districts. But anyway, for this time period, it was relatively easy to work with. So the data we obtained consisted in two data sets. They're very simple, but really interesting. So one is based on nearly 330,000 calls and emails for that time period of 13 months. That's about 1,300 per day. And it's distributed according to the type of request. So you see information on a file status, reason for refusal. So this is when the CA will ask why a file has been turned down, an application's been turned down, and administrative reconsideration, which is the strongest type of involvement when a CA will perhaps, think there's an error or the officer did not make a fair decision. Some CA will say this is the basis. This is when they decide to go a step further. So although the percentage is small, we have a reasonable number given the big sample. The data is also broken down by a category of admission. And you see that most requests from CA or from CAs to IRCC are about temporary migration in family class. And this temporary migration is very interesting because, as I said, these people are not residing or they're not permanent residents, they're not citizens. However, a number of requests also come from employers who hire temporary workers and come to the office. So the database looks like this. So as our colleague Benoit is working on this with us. So you see this bottom orange box with the administrative data, and using the district as a unit of analysis, we merged Statistics Canada data on the district characteristics, percentage of immigrants, recent immigrants, foreign born, percentage low income. We've also created a new variable to capture urban rural, so CMA, mixed CMA, and outside CMA. We've also collected from other sources gender characteristics of the MP, so gender, whether it's this person is of immigrant origin, and years of service. And we also have merged data from Elections Canada. So all this together, we're also using Experience Builder tool in ArcGIS to map all these data and to make them public, including the RCC administrative data. So we're running all kinds of interesting analyses, and I'll just very briefly tell you where the results are heading. So this first slide here indicates some results from the bivariate analyses on the total number of requests. So the volume of requests, which is an indication of the level of activity of the office. And here you have results for the two most significant variables. Not surprisingly, proportion of immigrants. The more immigrants, the more requests, and location. So this seems pretty logic. What's interesting is, I'm not showing it here, but political party was not very significant, except that Liberals were slightly more active, which is also because they are located often in districts with more immigrants. MP gender characteristics of MPs and income were not significant in bivariate analyses. I now move on to show you some results by type of immigration category. And this is a multivariate analysis. And what you can see is that all other things being equal, percent immigrant and location remain the most important, most significant variables. Political party is practically not significant, except as a low significance level in the case of economic migration, whereby Liberals are more active than the Bloc in Quebec. And percent low income as a low significance for family and temporary with less requests. So the take-home message from this analysis, and there's an article underway with much more on this database, is that really in Canada, what really matters is the district profile. And that's what shapes this variation, this unevenness. So is it that uneven at the end of the day is the question, right? Because more services are provided where people need the services are. So that's an interesting point to discuss. So in my last 10 minutes, I will address this third question and go into the qualitative data set. So the assistants are very interesting. What's their role really? Because as I said, in political science, who's paid attention to the role of MP or MPs, district offices, all the work is focused on MPs themselves. The assistants are practically invisible. So the first question that we have to look at in order to understand what role they play is to think about training and experience. First, who are CAs? First, jobs, CA jobs are rarely posted. Many CAs supported their MP during the campaign and got the job after, or they're a close friend of someone. Often they're hired within a very close network of the MP. And most SCAs found themselves doing immigration work without any previous experience. So how do they learn? How are they trained? How do they develop their know-how, their skills, practices, conduct? Is there a normative culture among CAs? Are they socialized into their job? Can we talk about a profession? So the first answer to all of this is that there is no systematic training. And to this question, most CAs just laugh, and say, training, what do you mean? There's no training. Because CAs largely learn on their own. They acquire their knowledge by doing. Some strategies involve learning from more experienced colleagues in the same office, studying resources on the internet, studying past resolved files by their colleagues when they have archives. They also have to build an informal network of other experts. And they learn a lot from their IRCC resources. In phone exchanges, they ask questions, they dig into cases. And those people at the end of the line, agents or visa officers, they become their coaches throughout this process. Some CAs that we've met even decide to become immigration consultants in order to better do their job. So that's very interesting. So contrary to other groups who perform border work and who receive formal training, CAs are more like community workers who become experts in one area as they learn. So experiential learning and bureaucratic practice is really how they figure it out and how they survive. So here's a good example of a CA who says the most formative files are when you're able to talk about the reasons for refusal with an agent who looks at the analysis of the visa officers and says, between you and I, there's a problem here. Here is what's happening. So when we can understand, we can apply our knowledge to other files. It is very formative to get through refusals. So you see that's how they learn. So it's very striking that immigration CA, of course, are not trained, it's not a profession, and yet it involves a high degree of specialization, a ton of knowledge, and the building of a strong network. There's very limited socialization among them, sometimes within political parties. And interestingly, they all say that COVID and online work has promoted more exchanges with more CAs within their party because they no longer had the day-to-day in-person proximity of their own office. The other aspect that's really interesting from the interviews is we ask them how they perceive their mandate. And here we see the variety coming up. So here, some people see themselves as, navigator, liaison, so we relay information, period. Others are a bit more involved and would describe themselves as trying to figure out the bureaucracy and as being mediators. Others really are even more involved and say, I'm a problem solver and I must provide support as much as possible. And some are really talking about being ombudsman or even social and administrative justice champion. Some people are just amazing. I tell you how much they dig into files and they go out of their way. They're like investigators, professional investigators. I'll share some quotes with you of the more involved people here. So one CA says, I provide nonpartisan, compassionate and caring support for constituents. And we aim to be really high. I have a real fast response. When answering the phone and they're like, wow, there's a person on the phone. And this is really kind of the signature of MP offices, that you can talk to someone and it's fast. And actually, this was very helpful for us in doing this research. The other assistant here will say, we consistently provide the gold standard of service. That's kind of our motto, to provide the gold level service. And they say, we leave no stone unturned. So really, we give it all we can, because constituents come to us with the hope that we can perform a miracle. So this word miracle, and among Quebec CAs, you know, la cour des miracles, this was something that came up a lot in interviews. Another CA, and that's really also representative of what many of us say, is we're not here to defend the government or explain why the government was right. We're here to understand the person and say, listen, it doesn't make sense. We're going to help you. So we found ourselves being the defender of the constituent. And we say, okay, we'll see what we can do. We'll go fight to help you with this. And we'll get back to you on that quickly. This one says, it doesn't matter which party they belong to, constituents, at the end of the day. It is just like the doctor seeing patients. It is care, constituents care, right? When our office is open, it's very busy. It starts at 10 until 4, and it goes on. And we have a room full of people all the time. It's like a doctor's office. And you know, we're trying to get resolutions, but that doesn't mean they're waiting 3-4 hours. So it's even better than the doctor's office because it's faster. And finally, one other CA, in referring to these very unique resources they have, says, in our office experience, we've been able to provide better assistance than paid lawyers or consultants. So this is the most involved and specialized ones. So to conclude, I'd like to say a few words about discretion among CAs. In their recent book, Discretion and the Quest for Controlled Freedom, Evans and Hoop talk about discretion as a tension between freedom and control. CAs have a very high level of freedom in how they develop their job, how they learn, how much they develop their network, how far they take files, you know, which files they take. I mean, they take everyone, but they have to choose which ones to push and how much they will push them. And they usually have an objective when they take on a file. At the same time, CAs work very independently and with very general directions from their MP. MPs know practically nothing about the day-to-day of immigration casework. So they will emphasize, you know, something like quality service or everyone must walk out of here satisfied. But really, this CAs decide how they will satisfy their constituents. And sometimes, as I said at the beginning, you know, they may not coincide with their MP. And this is an interesting space of discretion. This one says the famous line of our chief of staff is, all we can do is provide status updates. But I try to go beyond that and definitely advocate for some people. If we think a situation could be rectified or it doesn't make sense, we definitely try to help with those cases, go to the minister's office. So it's interesting because what matters here is that the outcome of discretion is qualitatively very different from the one exercised by visa officers who make a decision. Here, a lot of the work done by CAs, you know, as I said, is also this emotional work, you know, intermingled with this border work that they do. So, you know, it's I would talk about non-tangible outcomes because it involves emotional work as well as border work, but not really decision-making. And that's a realm untouched by visa officers who are nameless and visible for migrants and candidates to migration. So in conclusion, just a word to say that assistants look after people, listen to their problems. Some go out of their way to represent them in a dehumanizing and thick bureaucracy. In this role, they're closer to lawyers and consultants, but they're also very much like social workers. Yet they do not have formal training and they do not belong to any professional association or a regulated profession. So discretion among CAs is very unique due to their position within the landscape of immigration services. This position was not intended to become so central in the first place, but structural changes within RCC and the removal of frontline service points have given a new role to district offices, MPs, and their CAs. So thank you. We can, I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Danielle. You may not be able to hear that, but there are 50 people applauding, I assure you. And you were right on time. So we have about 13 minutes or so for questions. I'll just open the floor. While everyone is thinking, I can maybe get the ball rolling. I know this isn't exactly what your research was about, but did you ever have a chance to talk to some of the immigration officers, even perhaps staff at IRCC, about their opinions on CAs? Because, you know, to some extent, there must be a little bit of tension between them because they're overturning decisions at times.
No, we haven't talked to officers. But what we hear from CAs is that they talk to officers at the Ministerial Inquiries Division, and that there's a good collaboration because I think they respect each other. And when officers realize that an assistant has found, you know, an error, they are very receptive. And so, you know, I'm not sure about the tension, but I can say that there is collaboration. And the most professional CAs who can really analyze visa officers' notes know how to talk to visa officers. So, but that would be a good idea, certainly, to talk to other actors and see how they perceive CAs. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. There's a question in the chat box that I'll read out to you, okay? Mm-hmm. This is fascinating research. What happens to these skills if the CA loses the job when the MP is not reelected or chooses not to reduce immigration work in their office? Mm-hmm. Yes, on average, a CA receives the annual salary of $50,000, which is not so much for all the critical work they do. How could we justify this work condition?
Well, the first question is excellent, and many CAs talk about this, and they find it very terrible that all their, you know, all the work they've done, all the files are typically destroyed, especially if there's a change of political party in the writing, and all this knowledge, you know, this accumulated knowledge is lost. So yeah, it's an issue, and that's a big problem. And it's all, you know, public resources, so that's a problem. Usually when another MP is elected, it's a whole new staff, and they start from scratch, and they don't get the files from the previous MP. Sometimes when it's within the same party, they may transfer files, but even that is not that very common. It's not very common. So that's a big problem. Working conditions is a very interesting question. The oldest CAs, like the one who've done this for 20, 30 years, have discussed this and said that working conditions have improved. It's a very tough job. Basically, they have to be available around the clock. Some of them answer the phone 7 days a week. Some MPs are very, very demanding. But there have been some progress in terms of working conditions in guidelines to MPs and how to treat their staff. The NDP has a union for their CAs. That's the only party. So they have better working conditions. It's clearer what they're expected to do. But it's, for many people, it's a stepping stone. It's a job they get after they graduate, and then they move on. Some go to the federal government, some become consultants, some go back to school, some want to study immigration law, some just hate immigration after that and move on to other jobs. Some of them who remain in the job, you know, make this a career, really, and especially for MPs who've been in place for a long time. Some will work for different MPs within the same party. Some will move between provincial and federal offices. And some also have aspirations to become MPs. We've had that because we've asked them this question specifically. What are your plans for the future? But it's a tough job, absolutely.
Thank you for that. Any other questions?
I could talk a little bit about this relationship with the lawyers and consultants, because it's really interesting to see the differences between offices. In some offices, let's say in a wealthy urban district, the CA will say, all my clients also have a lawyer. And they come here and they go to the lawyer, and we actually work together to push files forward. So the CA will use their resources and share information with the lawyer. For instance, file status. The lawyer can put in a request through their portal, IRCC portal, where they're registered, but it takes much longer to get information. When they request visa officers' notes, they don't get as many details necessarily as CAs get. So they can work together. In many other offices, CAs will say, we cannot work with lawyers, we cannot do their job. They get paid to do their job. So we can't do their job, and they cannot use our resources. Those are unique to us, and so there's just a clear separation. They don't want to talk to each other. Same with consultants, and many people talk about fraudulent consultants, and they describe themselves as the mess cleaner. I have to clean the mess. This fake consultant just ruined this person's chances, and now we have to clean up. But some consultants will, in some writings, the MP will say, well, okay, or the CA will decide the consultant is also a constituent, and we have unique access to IRCC. It's useful to them, so let's use it and share information with them. So it's a very diverse kind of relationship.
Thank you. That is very interesting. Howard has a question.
So my question might be a little bit off base, but I'm curious if any discussion of some of the algorithmic processing came up as this is becoming a bigger part of IRCC, and whether or not the offices are even beginning to think of that, as that could clear out a lot of their caseload. And given that immigration issues clog up most MPs' offices, it's like I forget what astronomical proportion it is. So does this come up at all?
Yes, it does. And some CAs are frightened by this, not because they're afraid that it will reduce access to administrative justice. They have noticed that for some categories in some consulates, there have been some pilot programs in using AI in the treatment of visa applications. So they have noticed, for instance, that visa officers' notes no longer exist because, the artificial intelligence make the decision, and there are no notes. So in case of refusal, the room and the evidence, in order to make an administrative reconsideration, there's no more evidence to support that request. So immigration lawyers are very actively also working on all the implications of this. Some CAs are in touch with those lawyers, particularly in BC. They're very active, and it's becoming a big issue. And the criticism is that, those artificial intelligence could be very helpful to help people better prepare their files, better know, where the chances are. But for the time being, IRCC is using those tools to select, for immigration selection and decision making. But, there will be a lot of, that will raise a lot of questions. And that's actually something we're getting involved also at my chair. I have one person involved in this topic who's very interested in researching everything that's been happening in Canada with those tools so far. But yeah, it's likely to change their work. Hopefully, yeah, it could reduce the load, and it could reduce waiting times and all of that. But let's see.
We have time for probably one or two more questions. There is one in the chat box, but I want to give people who are on the cameras as well an opportunity. The question in the chat, I think it's an invitation to speculate a little bit, Danielle. What do you think would happen if what would the situation be if this work was not done by MP offices?
It would be a disaster, I think. I think people would not know what's happening with their application, you know, and people and there are a lot of mistakes and you know, documents that are not received or that are not received either by RCC or by applicants, emails that get lost, you know, and there are so many issues. Cases get so complicated that without the CAs there to provide this service for free, it could be a mess. Of course, it would be a big business for consultants who could see their client could get many more clients and immigration lawyers as well. So, but it would create a lot more inequalities in access, and many more people would fall between the cracks.
Yes, we have two questions. Anders first, and then Jasmine.
Well, then I just wondered, this is being the devil's lawyer, advocate, how many cases are actually going through this kind of process compared to the total number of cases? I mean, is it 10%? Is it 50%? If it's only 1%, then I just think that the importance must depend a little bit about how many cases are going through this way.
You mean through the administrative reconsideration? I'm not sure I understand your question.
No, so how many people are actually, I mean, compared to the total number of applications, how many people are approaching these kind of people?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Well, if you see, we can make a small comparison with, at least in terms of people who are seeking services or are seeking an update. IRCC Public Call Center had 1.7 million calls, and we have about 300,000 in our database. So of course, it's not everyone who goes to the MP offices. Yeah, but it's a fair amount.
Jasmine?
Yes, very fascinated by your description of the landscape and the fact that even temporary non-immigrants also get support some way through the CA offices. I'm just wondering, with respect to the data in your second part, because you are counting the number of requested and calls that are being made actually by the CAs, right? What can we say about other cases that, you know, people bring to the offices but doesn't get acted upon at all, and how does that how might that contribute to even more uneven landscape across the district in Canada?
Sorry, I didn't hear well the last part of your question. How about people who do not?
I mean, what about any requests that people bring to the office but receive zero action? So I say the CA received this request, but they're like, okay, I'm not going to check on that. And maybe there's another layer of unevenness in that landscape in terms of where people would act on something and where they don't. And can you provide some suggestion about that? Thank you.
Yes. And this would not come out in the administrative data either, of course. Yeah, because a lot of the work they do as well is simply explaining or you know, indicating a certain section of the website or just providing information. They also get cases whereby they know they cannot, you know, cases that require to go to federal court, they will refer directly to an immigration lawyer. But yeah, there are a lot of people for whom it will not show in the administrative data. In our survey, you know, we ask about everybody who comes, whether they take action or not. So this would be more of a reflection of the diversity of people, but we don't, you know, they don't quantify with precision the number of times or, so yeah, you're right. But this would be something to investigate further. It's another layer.
Great. Thank you, Danielle. Do you have time for one last question?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, Vicky, it's over to you.
Thanks very much. It was a great talk. And my question is about really the unevenness of whether people even know they can go to their MP to get this information. like, how do people know? It's not advertised, is it? It's just like you hear from your friends or you're desperate or something. But doesn't that actually lead to a lot of inequities in terms of just, you know, knowledge?
Yeah. Yes, yeah. Because it's not, you know, a national system, right? Official national system, although in some way it has become, but yes, it is unequal. And we asked them, you know, how do people know about your services? So, and, you know, as I said, all kinds of people refer people to the MP office. Some MP offices will talk about these services in a newsletter for people to read them or pay attention. Some will put that up on their Facebook page. Sometimes if they've had success with, let's say, avoiding a deportation order for a family, they may even, you know, feature this family with the MP and show their success. But that's very uneven, again, as how much they do this. But you're perfectly right. This is a big source of the unevenness, access to the existence, the knowledge about the existence of the service. And when we talk about, you know, those structural accesses in special call center, ministerial inquiries, most people are very surprised to find out that it's really structurally embedded and set up this way.
Great, thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Danielle. Thank you for your talk. Everyone, please join me in thanking Danielle for spending some time with us this afternoon. We appreciate it. We look forward to seeing this in print, obviously. Before we go, everyone, I have a couple of announcements that I'd like to make, please. First, we have a couple of speakers of interest, and I think it's probably of interest to many of us. Next week, the Department of Sociology and the Center for Research on Social Inequality is co-sponsoring a talk from Dr. Daniel Hebert of the University of British Columbia. The title of his talk is more of a colloquium. The title of his talk is Toward More Productive Policy-Oriented Research. So if anyone's interested in policy work, that's probably a must attend. Howard, am I correct in that it's open to everyone, not just sociology?
It's completely open to anybody who's interested, and he's going to in particular talk about his experience as an academic working inside government. And so for those who are interested in that kind of mix, it would be a good talk.
Yeah, sounds great. So that's one. The other one is our next MERS speaker series. That's in 2 weeks. We have Dr. Renee Lothra from the University of Essex coming. I don't yet have the title of her talk, but I will have it soon, and I'll send it out across the MER listservs. Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
We appreciate it. Great well wishes once again for 2022, and we'll see you at the next talk. Take care, everyone.